Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Candid Conversation. On our podcast today, we have with us Connor Gamble, a prominent personality in blockchain consulting. Connor's background is in law, having more than 10 years of experience in compliance and regulation. He's been in this crypto space since 2017 and has worked at senior management level for IOEN and a crypto exchange called Chainrift. Throughout his time, he has consulted on dozens of crypto projects, helping teams with strategy as well as global regulatory compliance issues. Today, Connor will be answering some questions related to law, regulations, compliance, and other interesting topics related to the blockchain. So let's welcome Connor here.
Yeah, very well. Good to be on the show while you guys get started. It's very exciting for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how has the evolving regulations impacted this decentralization? Because, there are a lot of, I would say, like, regulations are constantly being changing because of the recent collapse. Like, one example is FTX collapse, and I guess a lot of regulations came after that. So, how are these regulations basically impacting the decentralization?
Yeah, the FTX problem was pretty bad, but essentially I think that it didn't essentially revolve around crypto, if that makes sense. The failures of FTX, in my opinion, were purely managerial, and the way that they handled their resources, the customers' assets, essentially. They just really poorly managed it all. It's not necessarily that there was a problem with crypto at all. It's just one company doing the wrong thing. But to your point about regulations and sort of how they fit into all this, it's really been a bumpy path. A lot of governments and legislators, they're always playing catch up to technology, and there's always going to be that problem. Technology is always going to be ahead of law, and law takes a lot of time to research, go down the chain, and eventually make it up to regulation point. So in the early days, 2013, 2014, there were some pretty bold sort of moves by governments, and it was really out of fear to slow everything down. And it was kind of sad to see, because I think it did sort of stifle growth, and it stifled the technology itself. I live in Australia, and in Australia, some of the legislation and the taxation, we refer to it as the double tax problem that they had on crypto in the early days, and we saw a lot of companies exit the market in 2014, and it's a shame to think about that now. But it has changed, it has evolved, and now it's really seen as a positive thing, I think, in some respects. And we have epicenters like the Middle East who are really getting behind cryptocurrency, and I definitely think Dubai and Abu Dhabi and those types of places, they're really embracing this technology, and a lot of the major exchanges have actually relocated a lot of their headquarters into Dubai and into the Emirates, essentially.
Got it. So, talking about all these developments in regulation, I want to know, what are the other limitations? Few limitations that I know are scalability is one thing. Though it is getting solved with proof of stake coming into place, but power consumption because of the proof of work stake, the high requirement of computational power, and these regulations. So, what are the other limitations that you think are there in the blockchain? That's the first question. The second question is, and how are these limitations basically impacting the mass adoption of blockchain? Because blockchain is going to take some time to be adopted by the masses. So, how are these going to help in that?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, there's a lot of rollout of blockchain that people don't see, that a lot of the bigger organizations have already done, because it is such it's such a revolutionary sort of technology for things like data management and data protection. The technology that blockchain was built on is essentially torrenting. That tech's been around for 20 years. The patents came out in the early 90s for that, and it's really just the next step of that. It's just like a peer-to-peer sort of sharing. As far as the power consumption issue, I've faced that question many times over the years, and I always rebut it with just considering all the air conditioning and all the driving into financial epicenters around the world. Filling those buildings with people that perform very small transactions, and the SWIFT banking system, things that take days to process. it's a lot of bloat because it's system built on system built on system because it's such an old it's an old system. So the power consumption of blockchain, it is significantly less than if the mass sum. Even if, you know, some people in the naysayers will say, you know, oh, it uses a lot of power needlessly. You know, are we considering the driving into centers, into financial buildings? Are we considering all the power used there? Are we considering the manpower? So it really just isn't that simple, in my opinion.
Okay. So, like, do you still think that blockchain can be scaled with considering all these limitations? Do you think blockchain is scalable?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, we are seeing it happen. You know, JP Morgan coin exists, and it's how they transfer wealth around the world instantaneously or relatively instantaneously. This isn't a consumer product, and it's not something available to their customers either. This is just their internal bookkeeping. But as that trickles down, and a lot of things do start with these investment firms, these big banks, as things do trickle down into more consumer-facing products, we're seeing sort of an evolution of the financial system into that digital front, which does pose significant regulatory and compliance risks, of course, as well as, you know, libertarian risks, and there's a whole bunch of ethical questions that sort of go around that. Irrespective of that, the change is happening, and it's it just isn't as public as people see, because, you know, when people think of crypto, they think of the classics, you know, Bitcoin, Ethereum, you know, Doge, things like that. And it doesn't have that seriousness in the wider public yet. But people that understand the tech and can utilize the tech, you know, as I'm sure you're aware in the industry, it's pretty revolutionary.
Absolutely. So, got it. So, like, what is the role of like consensus mechanism in all of these? Like, talking about like all the people who are coming up with blockchain or different products. So, what is the role of consensus mechanism in that, and how is it evolved, like from proof of work to proof of stake? And there are multiple other mechanisms as well. So, like, if you can shed some light onto that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it really is just kind of a development from moving from, you know, computational power and that scarcity that's involved in performing calculations into man-made or liquidity style scarcity. That's how I sort of see the proof of stake. There's a lot more control in the contracts itself, and you're able to manipulate it a little bit more. That has significant benefit for a lot of the exchanges that use internal tokens as part of rewards programs, or you know, to you know, credit accounts with fees and things like that, especially lots of the big trading platforms. The reason that's important for them is that it allows them to burn tokens and create that scarcity. So it is more, it's more controllable essentially. I don't know, as far as just tokens that are moving towards proof of stake, it's really interesting to see how it's going to pan out, in my opinion, because it is a relatively new phenomenon post 2018, and sort of into 2019 and 2020 is where we saw a lot of tokens move to that working. Right. And it just comes down to the contract writers for those tokens, because if they don't have sound policy in place in the initial build of an ERC20 token or whatever they're using, then it's much more open to manipulation. It could be said. So it is something that I think we haven't really faced the big crisis with proof of stake tokens yet. Whether that will come or not, I'm not sure. I don't think anyone knows. But the same scrutiny that was put over the computational tokens, the proof of work tokens, has not been applied yet to proof of stake.
Got it. So, like you told, something related to liquidity and it's man-made. So can you shed more light onto it? Like, how is the liquidity impacted and how is it man-made? Because from my understanding, proof of like consensus mechanism is basically a process by which the blocks are validated. Like, people vote and like make sure that the blocks are validated and then added. So how is the liquidity and man-made process impacting to that?
Well, I'll use an example. So crypto.com's token, the CRO, the CRO, that token, this can also be applied to some of the relics like Bitfinex and things like that. Their Leo token. They, with the burn system, it'll, and some of their rewards programs. So crypto.com's credit card, for example, that has the rewards and things like that. When the supply is low, the value of the token goes up. I mean, we can all agree on that. It's basic, Austrian economics, supply demand type curve, right? By allowing them to burn tokens and add tokens whenever they, as part of their programs and have more change over it, they have more control over the liquidity as opposed to using that computational power. So the tokens are minted rather than mined. I think that's the bottom line. So when you just print tokens, everything that comes after that, as far as the validation and as far as some of the earlier ones like EOS, that was one of the earlier tokens that did this. They've got a bunch of people that validate the blocks, and they're on part of the program and they get a share of the reward. But the tokens themselves are just minted, and that's sort of where the regulation as well comes into it, as to perhaps classifying it as a security, which is a big issue in the industry.
Got it. So, Connor, before we move on to the challenges like security and other regulation challenges, I would just like you to explain what is proof of work and what is proof of stake, just for our viewers, because a lot of them are not don't know much about crypto or are pretty new to the industry. So if you can explain what is proof of work and what is proof of stake to them.
Yeah, I think proof of work is computational resource being used, and proof of stake is a contract being written and then maintained. I think that's the easiest way to describe it. So even though the proof of work requires maintenance, because it requires nodes and things like that to run the network itself, the tokens are minted according to the initial contract very incrementally and as a direct result of computational power. Proof of stake, on the other hand, is minted instantly or based on any number of rules, and then is the network itself is maintained by either backing off like a Polygon network or an Ethereum network, or doing the having those block providers essentially, and having community vote and things like that in order to distribute the rewards. So it is a little bit more complicated, but when looking at some of the regulation and things around it, there's significantly less risk with proof of work.
Got it. So now let's move on to something that's your core expertise. So can you tell me how, from a security perspective and a legal perspective, there are multiple challenges that are faced. So can you specify a few challenges that are faced by the blockchain industry from a legal and security perspective?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is that securities issue, and it's been a debate that's been going on for years now. Since sort of 2017, really. Is a cryptocurrency a security or an asset or a currency itself, right? And I don't think that's been fully answered yet, but we've made significant steps, especially in the last 2 years, I think. The issue is the consumer protection organizations around the world, things like the SEC and whatever financial regulator is in your area, is actively trying to prevent businesses from selling securities, selling chunks of their company without going through the proper due diligence. And it just comes down to the protection of consumers. So their heart's in the right place, but it does sort of stifle industry, and we've seen that multiple times. That's the number one challenge. The second challenge that I sort of come across in my consultancy is that a lot of blockchain companies are unprepared for the operating in the area they're choosing to operate in or base out of, and then also serving the rest of the community and getting the basic forms and getting in touch with their regulator and ensuring that everything's done properly. And it's all just about reducing as much risk as possible. So it is just essentially risk management, but playing within the rules gives companies a proper chance of being as legitimate as possible, and it also makes the industry look good. So it's something that I feel is really important.
Got it. So, like majority of the industries have, like majority of the financial industries have their framework, like compliance framework and multiple other sort of framework. So, what are the different frameworks that we have in crypto industry? Like, does there exist any framework that makes sure that crypto industry is moving the right direction, is like and is getting safe for the retail participants as well? Like, is there any compliance frameworks right now?
Yeah, not really. I mean, some of the stuff with the OECD, who they're an authority that basically they basically consult with a lot of the governments around the world and try to plan for the future. They put out a bunch of papers on how they view crypto and things like that. And then also in the States, the FATI or FITA, I can't remember the name fully. They also have rules that they hand down. And I think one of the safer things that certainly in the past, it's not as important now because there are sort of some glimmerings from a lot of the governments that change is happening and there is a bit of direction, especially around the taxation. I think the taxation is quite clear now globally on what needs to be done and the obligations on businesses and individuals as far as tax for crypto goes. But certainly back in 2017, 2018, when I was at the exchange, we just had to tailor it to the US rule. And the reason we did that is because the SEC, first and foremost, can prosecute cross borders. So they're a very unique agency. And their only criteria for opening investigations is that you have sold something to a US citizen, which is why we see a lot, even now, you go to gate.io or any of those exchanges, the States is kind of ruled out. And if you are a citizen of the US, it's because of how onerous the SEC was. So when there was a lot of fear, everyone was trying to align with the SEC rulings and trying to make sure that they weren't classified as a security by implementing as much of the ruling as they can. But some tokens chose to just block out the US market, which presents pretty significant challenges. And it's a huge market share and a market share that, frankly, as a business, you don't necessarily want to miss out on. So someone like me, I come into a business and I just make sure that they can operate properly in those jurisdictions, which really helps.
Got it. So, like, as you mentioned that governments are a bit sneaky about crypto. So, what role does CBDCs have in, like, are they going to promote the idea of blockchain at a I would say at a later stage, or how are the CBDCs launch impacting the crypto industry?
So they're coming from a position that they're protecting the current financial system. So they're already off to, they're already coming to it from a pretty negative place, in my opinion. And their implementations, they're really just looking to lift as much as they can from some of the blockchain and some of the tokens and a lot of the tech, and then try to implement it into, federally recognized currencies. So a lot of crypto still now is classified as an asset rather than, a share or something like that. And that's how you can liken it to a possession, in a sense. It's like having a rare vintage guitar or, something like that, something that holds value over time that you can sell at a later stage rather than a currency. That's sort of how the governments, that's I guess the place they're coming from now. But with the updates to the UAE and how favorable they've been to a lot of cryptocurrency exchanges and embracing the technology, it's really promising for how how the future might integrate something like this into the system itself.
Got it. So, like, do you think the future of crypto is bright, or do you think like crypto is going to fade and just the blockchain technology? Because crypto is just one application of blockchain, right? So, what do you think is the future of crypto? Because I particularly believe that the fundamentals of blockchain are very strong, and it is in a stage where internet was in 1990s, but it's going to like blow up. So, how do you think is crypto going to perform in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of different and interesting applications of blockchain, all the way down to new versions of the web, and decentralizing entire sort of sites and things like that, and having a whole new way of interacting. It's still in early phases, and frankly, I think that the advertising market will really help bring it out. I know that sounds a bit weird, but in the past, advertising has really, taken some technologies and industries and driven it. And I think certainly for the metaverse, it is a bit of a publicity stunt still now, but they're just starting to sink their teeth into it, and that's sort of where the explosion will be. And I think that crypto plays a part into that sort of world as a way of transacting between people, and then also applications with different ERC tokens like NFTs and things like that, and collectibles and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. It certainly isn't crypto hasn't died or hasn't seen the end or anything like that. I don't see it that way. But that's as far as the innovators. I think that's the space they'll be operating in. And then other applications of blockchain are pretty boring. They're very database driven. So lots of backlines of businesses that currently exist, passing documents around. There'll be an integration into law, most certainly, with contracts and basically stamping, authority as to dates and times and who and when, and then putting it in a blockchain so it can't be disrupted, can't burn down. It won't be in an office somewhere on a computer, and so there's lots of boring little applications of blockchain, but the really exciting stuff is that metaverse sort of Web 3.0 generation, I think, and how crypto fits into that.
Absolutely. So you also talked about like you are a consultant and you provide blockchain and compliance consultancy. So what does your company Seegson do, and like what kind of services do you provide in that?
Yeah, so Seegson's just a consultancy business for any blockchain companies that are looking to handle the compliance and regulation side. So the compliance and regulation side, it's a pretty tough sort of area, and there are a lot of lawyers and law firms out there that pretend that they know what they're doing in blockchain and like to add blockchain to their title and things like that. Having been in the industry for since 2016, 2017, I've sort of seen all that, and it kind of saddens me, just because they take a lot of people for a ride. I'm someone who really believes in the tech, and I guess that's the difference. And I'm someone who really understands the tech, and I think that's the difference. So on all the teams that I've worked with in the past, lots of different tokens, bringing them to market, lots of strategy decisions. I've got experience in operations as well. The big difference with Seegson is that sort of, I can talk to engineers, and then I can go talk to regulators, and in my that's really what's kept me afloat and what's kept my business going.
Got it. So like, in what aspects do you help do you help the development teams, like all the legal matters, like including patents, IPs, and everything? Like, do you help in all of those matters, or like are there some specializations that you excel at?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. So working with exchanges, I've designed and built up their compliance programs. So integrating verification into their systems and being able to draw up the flow charts and maps, and then also ensuring that the liability stays with those providers and not on the business itself. So it's sort of like a service of guiding engineers as to what they need to do to become compliant and to ensure that things are protected. I'm not here to, to comment on the security of an exchange, or I'm not here to comment on how a trading engine should work or anything like that. But what I do is I help plan and ensure that the regulations are followed and that the reports are filed at the correct times. I give sort of reports on how and when things need to be reported to authorities. Basic things like transactions over $10,000, they have to be reported to somebody. And I just set up teams with that knowledge and allow them to take the reign.
Got it. So yeah, Connor, that was it for today's episode, I guess. And it was great talking to you. And thank you so much for sharing all these insightful details with us. And I'll be linking all your social media handles and all your contact details so that if anybody wants those consultancy services from you, they can directly reach out to you. And it was great talking to you. Thank you so much
Right.
for this, Connor.
Thanks so much, Ash. Take care, guys.